Hello guys and welcome back to FatbossTV. Today we're having a look at another boss from raid testing on the Legion Alpha with High Botanist Tel'arn from the Nighthold.
Yes, this is a fight that will take place in the later parts of the instance. You'll probably be fighting this guy around like 7th or 8th-ish. And it's quite an interesting one because it starts off with just a single target boss. It's just by himself and doing his mechanics. But as the fight progresses, he keeps splitting into new forms, which will bring new mechanics to the encounter. And by the end of it, you have 3 of these bosses, all with like new mechanics as you go throughout. So it goes from a single target fight to a council fight, all within a single encounter, which is really nice.
And the cool thing about it as well is that even though this is only heroic, the 3 bosses that are up at the end are like super important in terms of you understanding exactly how they work, because on Mythic, the fight is pretty much the same, except you have all 3 bosses up from the very, very start.
Yeah.
So if you learn how to do this well on Heroic, when transitioning from Heroic to Mythic, you'll probably have a much better chance of killing the boss in a good time, simply by understanding the fight in Heroic. So let's start off and let's talk about the boss just by himself in Phase 1, and let's get the tank bullshit out of the way first. Let's talk about the main debuff you need to worry about, which is Recursive Strikes. So this debuff just makes you take 15% more damage from all melee attacks that the boss does. But this debuff also makes you take extra damage from melee attacks even if they're not applied to you. So when you do a tank switch, you'll still be taking damage. So the idea is you just try and keep these stacks as low as you possibly can, and healers need to take into account that both tanks will be taking damage, so you got to heal both of them. The most noticeable ability that the boss does is something called Solar Collapse. This is just a ginormous ring of circles that will slowly start moving towards each other, and as they do move, they will pulse and deal damage to anyone that's on top of them. If you get hit by this, when we were testing, it didn't one-shot you, but if you get hit by 2 at the exact same time, which was, you know, pretty possible, especially as the rings get closer towards the middle, you will be one-shot.
Yeah, the key of dealing with this mechanic is literally quick reaction. Like at the beginning, the points of like energy are so far apart that you can easily like pass between them. But as you said, as they start getting closer and closer, it's pretty difficult to squeeze in between them, especially if you haven't got like a blink or something. And if you take 2 of them, you're gonna get one shot.
Yeah.
So just make sure you react very quickly when dealing with this mechanic. That's what we did, and not many people died. It's fine to take 1 hit, but no more than that.
Another ability that requires pretty quick reaction time is something called Controlled Chaos. This ability is more or less just Fellseeker from Manaroth. It will mark a random location of a player with a small purple circle. This purple circle will then get bigger, and after it's done 3 sets of damages and grown 3 times, it will then disappear.
Yeah.
However, it pretty much works like the enhanced version that you see in the very last phase. It will deal damage to everyone in the room regardless, but if you're inside the circle, you're pretty much one shot. So yeah, the circle spawns, get the fuck away from it, and the healers just need to heal up the damage.
Yeah, and it's pretty difficult to see as well. It's like a purpley color on a purple background,
Yeah,
which is a little bit shit.
It could probably be improved.
So yeah, you really need to keep an eye out for this ability.
And the last thing to worry about in this first phase when the boss is on his own is something called Parasite Theta. This is a debuff that is applied to a single player. It will root them and just deal ticking damage to them, and it will just ramp up over time. As soon as you dispel this debuff, 2 parasite ads will spawn out of that player, and what they'll do is they'll immediately fixate on random players within the room. As they start running over towards these players, if they melee hit them, it will apply the root debuff to them, which means you then have to dispel them, which spawns even more parasites. It becomes completely out of control. So the idea is, as soon as you dispel the first person, everyone in your raid switches to these parasites. You can stun them, you can slow them, and whoever is being fixated, they get the hell away from them and make sure they're not melee hit. Providing you do that, and providing you kill the ads off really quickly, this ability in itself is not a big deal. So pretty much all the mechanics in Phase 1 are just having good reaction time. If you can deal with everything quickly, it's a non-issue.
Yeah, it's very important, especially with Parasite Theta having very quick reaction time as well as raid awareness, because if you become one of the fixated players, not only do you need to be away from that guy as soon as possible, but you actually want to be near the other fixated player, or at least in the same sort of like line of sight direction. So the 2 ads, if they do happen to move, they'll move together, so you can keep doing cleave DPS, and if the ads stay up too long, they get faster and faster, and at a certain point, they'll become immune to CC. So once again, keeping them together, keeping them clumped up will make sure both of them die at the right time.
Now, as soon as the boss hits 75% after cycling through those 4 abilities, he will then split and a new boss will join the encounter. These bosses do have a shared health pool, so you can't just nuke one down and no longer have to deal with his abilities. You do have to deal with the abilities for the entire fight. So now is the time you get your cleave and your dots on.
Yeah.
Because this is where you're really going to maximize damage.
So in this phase, you will still have to deal with the mechanics mentioned in Phase 1. All of them remain the exact same. However, a couple new mechanics have been added to the encounter with the introduction of this new version of the boss. One of them for the tanks to worry about is Flare. This is just a cast on the tanks which will do a small amount of fire damage to the tank, as well as anyone else within 4 yards. So as long as the tanks are spread apart by 4 yards, this ability pretty much causes no issues. But you do got to take into account that although this ability kind of like promotes the idea of spreading apart, you really want to keep the bosses as close together as possible so you can continue doing cleaving. And to be honest, the damage from this ability is so low anyway, you could probably keep stacked up and no one would even fucking notice. But generally speaking, if you can stay 4 yards apart, great. Just keep the bosses on top of one another. Everyone will love you for it. The main big hitter that's been introduced in this phase, and it's a pretty fucking impactful ability, is Plasma Spheres. The boss will spawn 3 of these fire orbs, which will appear in set locations around the encounter area. Now these orbs don't do any abilities that players need to deal with directly. Instead they'll just sit there and slowly lose 2% of their max HP every 0.3 seconds, so they'll just slowly die off over time. Now once an orb does die, it will explode, dealing a large burst of damage to the entire raid, whilst applying a debuff to all players that causes them to take extra damage from other plasma sphere explosions by 100% for 5 seconds. So pretty much when one of these goes off, you'll be taking a shit ton extra damage from other explosions that will be coming. And if all 3 happen at the exact same time, so you just leave them and they all just die off at the same time, you will instantly wipe. It's very, very important that you deal with these orbs. So it is the job of the group to kill off these orbs in a way which will cause the explosions to be at least 5 seconds apart. We decided just to nuke one orb off immediately, then about 5 or 6 seconds later we'll kill off another orb. We will just like kill that off separately, and then the last orb we just completely left alone. This allowed us to like stagger the orb explosions far enough apart, so of course we didn't take the extra damage, but it also gave our healers enough time to top us all off. So basically stagger these bastards out, and whatever orb you decide not to attack, don't even dot it. Don't even look at it. Don't accidentally auto attack it. You've got like 2 bosses to fucking dot on. Don't be a cheeky bastard and try and get ranks or anything, because you'll just fuck everyone over. So that's pretty much all you have to do for this new phase, is just make sure you spread apart as tanks for the flare, which isn't even that much of a big deal. It's just dealing with these spheres correctly. As long as you nuke one off, wait for the explosion, 5-6 seconds later, kill the other one, and then just chill, and the last one will just explode by itself. And that's pretty much all you have to do, but on top of everything else that's happening in phase 1.
And then once you've reached those bosses to 50% health, the boss will then spawn another boss into the encounter area, and this is when phase 3 begins. In this phase, of course, you will have all the mechanics from the previous phases, so you'll have all the shit from phase 1, as well as all this new shit in phase 2, and in phase 3, there's even more shit to deal with. So you'll have toxic spores. These are simply objects that will just sort of float around the room, like little spory, nutty looking things. If you walk into them, you will absorb them, and you'll get a dot on you. This does a large amount of damage, and it does stack. If you soak multiple spores, you're basically screwing yourself. These spores don't spawn that quickly, but at some point you will have the room pretty much caked in spores.
Yeah.
So it's probably a good idea to absorb them, and you can like use immunities, you can use things like debts. We actually decided to get players to get really high stacks and then use things like ice block and shit like that, just to try and clear up the room as much as possible. Ultimately, you could probably develop a strategy where you maybe use one half of the room, and then once you're happy with how many spores are there, you could then move into the other half of the room potentially.
Yeah, you could probably do something like that.
But I think that really would depend on how high your DPS is. But generally, just make sure you don't soak them, especially if you can't immune them. Also to worry about is Grace of Nature. This is a cast where the new boss will simply place a green pool underneath any of the bosses. This green pool just applies a massive healing to any of the bosses inside it. So it's very, very important as a tank, you get the bosses out of that green pool as soon as possible. If it heals for too much, you're just going to fall behind. You're going to have too many spores in the room. You're going to have to deal with the mechanics for way longer than you'd actually want to, and you'll probably wipe. So green pool, get the fuck out of it. That's pretty much all you need to know.
One thing you can do with this as well is that the boss actually stands still to cast it. So as soon as you see the cast happening, just drag the other 2 bosses away, and then the third boss, once he finishes the cast and places the green pool underneath himself, he'll just run back to you. So you can like kind of pre-move from it. So that's not a bad idea to do.
And the last ability that you need to worry about is Cooler Than Night. This is a debuff that is applied to a couple of players that causes them to take very high ticking damage, but they will also apply that ticking damage to the entire raid. However, if one player stands within like the targeting circle that's around them, which is roughly 5 yards, the ticking damage will only be applied to the player that has the debuff as well as the person standing inside the circle. The rest of the raid will no longer get hit. So as soon as the debuffs come out, you basically want to run on top of someone that has the debuff, or the person that has the debuff needs to run on top of a player that doesn't have the debuff, just to reduce the amount of damage that's going out on the raid. And of course, you need to try and stick with those players and try and move with those players, which can be pretty difficult, especially when all these other abilities are going on. But you just need to try your best at doing it. Ideally, you want to do it in such a way that requires the healers not to, you know, have a heart attack and fucking use cooldowns and shit like that. If you do it perfectly, then, you know, there's no damage going out on the raid whatsoever, and you can just spot heal those people instead.
If you wanted to be a clever fucker, though, you might be thinking, oh, just bung the 2 people with the debuff together. That doesn't work. They need to be with an undebuffed player, so you can't get both Call of Night players to cuddle. They need to be cuddling with untainted people.
I mean, technically, you could put them on top of the tanks. I mean, there is the Flare ability from Phase 2 that is in play. But if Flare doesn't do a lot of damage on live, then yeah, you could just throw them on the tanks. One thing to probably note is that while we were testing this, as you can see on screen now, the debuff is actually permanent. It wasn't intended to be permanent, at least we don't think it was. After doing Mythic testing, like a couple of weeks later, the debuff was only 30 seconds.
Yeah, and it says in the Dungeon Journal now for Heroic it's 30 seconds as well. So we assume that it will just appear more frequently, but just last a shorter amount of time.
Yeah.
So you just have to cuddle different people more often.
And that's all the mechanics. So there's not that many of them, as you guys can see. There's very few abilities in this fight.
The thing is, the fight does, like, the way it works, I think, it kind of, although there are this many abilities, because it starts off and there's very few of them, they're very impactful, don't get me wrong. There are quite a few of them, and then there's a little bit more, and then there's like, oh god, there's so fucking many. But the thing is, you've learned it as you've been going along, so even though the solar collapse, that might have fucking insta-killed you the first time, you're probably never going to die from that in Phase 3, because it's like, oh, I know how to deal with that by now.
Yeah.
These mechanics, they just become so second nature by the time you get to the last phase, that you get to focus on the new stuff, and I think that's really good. By the end of it, if you like look and watch yourself back, you're like some crazy fucking ninja, dodging all of these mechanics, and if you do it perfectly, you play very well. It like promotes very good play in order to deal with the mechanics. It's really
and also,
cool.
I think I would say about this fight, it's been designed really well because there's not too many really stupid overlaps or brutal overlaps.
Yeah, generally
the timings
speaking.
of the abilities are really, really good. So you'll never see anything like a Fell Seeker and the rings at the exact same time. It's deliberately designed in such a way so you don't see that sort of bullshit. Because think about how many times you could get fucked over because you're moving from a Fell Seeker and then suddenly there's a ring right on top of your face, you know.
But they do kind of like somewhat work together, especially with the Parasite Theta, the fact that it roots you.
Yeah.
That can come in maybe like 2 or 3 seconds before a high movement mechanic, such as like the Solar Collapse or the fucking Fell Seeker. Before that comes in, so you got to make sure that you react quickly, because you never want to just instantly dispel the player, because you want to make sure that people at least move like 5 yards away, just
especially
in case
if it spawns
they
at
get
melee
fixated.
or something.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got to be very, very careful with that, and it kind of just, you got to be quick, and the mechanics do somewhat work together, but I wouldn't say at any point it felt like, oh, this is bullshit, this is unfair, I'm not given enough time.
Apart from on Mythic, that shit was crazy.
Okay, a Mythic was maybe a little bit heavy, but it's Mythic, it's supposed to be heavy. What I also really like is just how fucking punishing the fight is. I think it's really good.
It's very punishing for players that aren't very good at moving from things.
Yeah.
Because there's so much shit to look out for and move from. You know, there's a lot of shit going on. But it's a great fight. Really, really great encounter.
A couple of things, though, that I think could definitely be improved. Once again, with the controlled chaos, having a purple ability in a purple room, very, very bad.
It'd be nice to see that
decision.
being fixed before live.
Yeah, in Mythic it wasn't as bad, but it still was a little bit shitty. So yeah, maybe that was a little bit meh, but that's pretty much all I can come up with, is the fact that that ability was the wrong color. Everything else I'm quite happy with the fight. It's actually a very decent length, because as the fight goes on, you actually kill the bosses quicker and quicker because there's more of them, and it kind of works at the same time because you're dealing with more and more mechanics at the same time of it becoming quicker and quicker. It does feel quite chaotic at the end, but not in like a uncontrollable way, and that's what makes it cool.
And it's nice that they got a shared health pool, so
Yes.
you have to deal with everything all the way until the end, unlike Mythic.
Yes, Mythic's completely different. Can't wait to do that when it comes out.
But thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this little boss preview as much as we enjoyed testing it, and we shall see you in the next video.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.